All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Gorowski, and I will be your host for today. We couldn't be more excited to be hosting events during Secret Path Week in partnership with the Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund. The Downie Wenjack Fund is part of musician Gord Downie's legacy and embodies his commitment and that of both the Downie and Wenjack families to call Canadians to action in solidarity with Indigenous peoples of this land. So the goal is to continue the conversation that began with Chanie Wenjack's residential school story and to support the reconciliation process through awareness, education, and action. So classrooms across Canada will have been joining in with us to help us celebrate Indigenous scientists, artists, and leaders from across the country and work towards meaningful reconciliation. So we've had about 15 events since last Thursday, and this is actually our final event of Secret Path Week. So we're hanging out with Rena Priest. She's a 2019 National Geographic Explorer, a writer, and a member of the Lummi Nation. So her debut book, Patriarchy Blues, garnered 2018 American Book Award, and her most recent collection, Sublime Subliminal, was selected as the finalist for the Floating Bridge Press Chapbook Award. Her current project follows regional efforts to restore health and habitability of the Salish Sea to benefit critically endangered southern residents, killer whale pods, as well as wild chinook salmon. All right. Well, I think it's time that we jump over and meet Rena. And then Rena, when you're ready, just let me know when you want me to share. So it's so great to have you joining us live today.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be with you all this afternoon. And we can go ahead and start now.
All right, sounds good. So I'm going to pin the video to my screen now. And then Rena, just let me know if you can see what I'm sharing. And then I will start moving through the slides. You just tell me where to go. So it should be on the screen now.
Go ahead and go up to the top, to the very first slide.
All right, beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to share with you a little bit today about the work that I've been doing this past year with the support of National Geographic to learn about and follow the story of the southern resident orcas in Washington state. They're an endangered population. Our tribe, the Lummi Nation, we call them the Qwel, and we think of them as our relatives under the waves. We think of them as people. And science is showing that their brains, that their cognition abilities are so advanced that they are, in fact, in many ways, able to reason and think and experience emotion the way that people do. So go ahead and continue. Next slide. So here's a picture of an orca that I was actually out on a boat this summer and I got to see this. Go ahead and go to the next one. One of the things that I've been doing is following the story of Lolita. She was an orca that was taken from the Salish Sea back in 1970. So that's 49 years ago. And she was taken to Miami Seaquarium. And Lummi, my tribe, is trying to bring her home so that she can live the rest of her life out in the Salish Sea in a sea sanctuary. And I believe that this is the plan or the hope that for all captive killer whales is to be able to retire them to sea sanctuaries in hopefully more pristine waters. And as part of that, one of the things that is being done in Washington state right now is looking at environmental cleanup of the Salish Sea. So go ahead and go to the next one. Oh, so this is Miami Seaquarium where she's held. And as you can see, not a lot of visitors. It was very quiet the day that I went there to see her. And so it just kind of seems really like it's time to bring her home. Go ahead to the next one. She lives in a little tiny tank. There's in the circle, that's the size of her tank. Go ahead and go to the next one. And this is where she's from. So this is the Salish Sea. These are the ancestral highways of the Lummi Nation and other Coast Salish tribes. And in this square, there's a little tiny red dot. So this whole region on the map that you see is her natural habitat. The white square represents 25 square miles, which I think you guys are on kilometers. So I think that's 50 kilometers. And then the little tiny red dot represents her tank. So she's lost a lot of her ability to be able to roam free. And so one of the things that we're working on is trying to figure out how we can get her back so that she can retire in a sea sanctuary. And this is Limekiln Lighthouse on San Juan Island, near where the southern resident orcas regularly stop by. Go ahead and go to the next one. So this is the Penn Cove. This is Penn Cove where she was captured. And this is the sunrise. Go ahead and go to the next one. And this is the dock where they lifted her out and they transported her to Seaquarium through a sling. And every year there's a commemoration event and a memorial. Activists trying to raise attention and awareness to be able to try to bring her home. So go ahead and skip to 2 more. And the next one. So, a southern resident killer whale requires between 300 and 350 pounds of chinook salmon per day in order to survive. And one of the reasons that people say it's not a good idea to send Lolita home from Seaquarium is that her pod in the Salish Sea isn't doing so well, mostly because there's not enough salmon. So Lummi, for one, has started to offer started ceremonial feeding of the southern resident killer whales. Go ahead and go to the next one. And part of the reason for that is that ceremony reminds us of our connection with all living things and our Lhaq'temish, which is our sacred obligation to the salt and fresh waters, the lands, our ancestors, our sacred sites, our language, our culture, our people, and all our relations, human and non-human. So we acknowledge that it's not just us that matters in our environment, it's all things. And this is a picture of our children learning about the first salmon ceremony or participating in the first salmon ceremony, which the story goes that there was a time when Lummi people were hungry and had no food, and they sent a young man out in a canoe to try to find something for the people to eat. And he got lost out in the fog, and he started to sing his song, and he heard some rippling off in the distance. And so he paddled over to see what was going on, and it was a woman. And she had a big cedar hat like the ones that these children are wearing, but it was big. And she said, you're lost. If you help me, I will help you. And so he invited her into the canoe, and she said, what are you doing out here in the fog? And he said, well, I'm looking for food for my people. And so she dipped her hat into the sea, and each time she dipped 5 times, and each time she brought out a different species of the salmon. And the people were no longer had to be hungry. And so we honor the salmon every year with this story. And it's more complex and complicated. If I had more time, I'd tell you the whole thing, but go ahead and go to the next one. So our ceremonies and our stories teach us that everything is connected, and everything in our way of life, our Chilean, has purpose and meaning. And so, for example, as you can see in this picture right here with the cedar wreath next to this young man, we put those on the hull of a canoe. This is a canoe that is used in traveling. So when our people used to potlatch, they would travel the ancestral highways from village to village and celebrate all summer long and share food and song and dance. And so when they would come ashore, we would put these cedar wreaths onto the canoes. And it was, so we were giving our visitors a means of attracting salmon when they're out on the water, because salmon navigate by their sense of smell. And if they smell cedar from along the banks of their stream, they'll be attracted to it and swim toward it. So as you can see, the cedar branches used to hang down into the water, and then that's how the salmon would navigate back to where they're from. And so if there were a cedar bough from along their stream hanging from the hull of a canoe, they would be attracted to that. And then the people wouldn't have to be hungry while they were out on the water. They could harvest the salmon that came to their canoe. Okay, next slide. So the salmon are a symbol of resilience and striving towards life, and they swim thousands of miles to return to their spawning grounds. And the wild salmon of the Salish Sea, they face more challenges today than any other time in history. Go ahead and go next. So there's dams that prohibit their ability to swim upstream. Go ahead and go next. And then also hatcheries. Hatcheries were put in place to mitigate the damage done by the dams, but they're showing now that they could potentially be bad for the salmon because they make them swim in these little circles. This concrete thing over here on the right, that's a picture of an empty bin. The little fish down here on the lower left, they just swim around and around and around, which is not very much like a natural environment. And so they kind of lose their way, and it's not that good for them to be living in that environment. So go ahead and go next. And there's also birds that can prey on the fish really easily in hatcheries. And so they do things like set off loud explosions. And here you can see the little dancing car wash guys. They're there to try to prohibit the birds from feeding on the salmon smolts. And then this is a nice stream, which is really hospitable to salmon spawning, but it's not very protected by shade. So go ahead and go next. Also, runoff and pollution are challenges to the salmon. There have been a lot of forest fires in the region over the last few years, and so all of that debris comes down the stream or down the mountainside and into the streams, and that's not good. That's hard for the salmon as well. And also pesticides for agriculture and city waste runoff. Go ahead and go next. In Washington State, we produce a lot of tulips and apples, and that's great for us. But again, it's a challenge because we have to find sustainable ways to grow these things so that the chemicals and things that we use don't run into the water into the ocean. Go next. Oh, next slide. Did I lose you? Okay. Also, marine vessel traffic is a little bit of a hindrance.
Not going, it went too annoying.
Oh, hello? You can go ahead and go to the next one. I think we lost, am I the one?
Yep. He's here. Okay.
Okay. Oh, you're frozen. Oh, okay. So this is just a picture of the whale watching boats. Washington State recently passed a law that said that they have to stay 450 feet away from southern resident orcas, or actually, I think all marine mammals, because one of the things that happens is when an orca comes up for a breath, whatever is in the air around where they surface, when they breathe that in and then they go in for a deep dive, all of that air gets compressed and it gets pushed out into their bloodstream. And if there are toxins in the air, then it accumulates in their blubber. So now we've taken actions to make sure that the air that they breathe when they come up is clean and not filled with like exhaust from boats or anything like that. Go ahead and go to the next one. And the next one. Is it stuck? So solution. It seems kind of like there's I don't want to sound bleak, but we have a long way to go for orca and salmon recovery. And tribes are urging state and federal agencies to take up their own Lhaq'temish, their sacred obligation to put the well-being of future generations above politics and economics. This photo here is taken at the Lower Elwha tribal offices. And the Lower Elwha are a good example to us on how dam removal can be put in place. Go ahead and go to the next one. They really fought in order to have dams removed from their rivers so that the salmon could go back upstream. In the upper right, that's a picture of the Elwha River in its restored state. There used to be a huge dam blocking that, and no fish could get through that at all. But to the left, that's a test site where they monitor conditions for salmon, and it's showing like really, really positive recovery. Nature's super resilient, and it's just come back. So the fish have returned, and they've come back in good numbers. Next. So the Chilean and Salish Sea campaign, Lummi is calling on a moratorium for increased vessel, they're calling on a moratorium on increased vessel traffic. So they don't want any more vessels coming through, and that includes projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline and Roberts Bank Terminal expansion. And we're also working towards restoration of salmon to levels measured in 1985. And we're doing habitat restoration and supporting Governor Inslee on the removal of dams on the Lower Snake River. And above all, we're using our culture and storytelling to teach about our sacred obligation. Thank you. And Haishka, that's our tribal word for thank you.
All right, I'm just gonna come back from the screen share. I should be back now. Am I back now? Yeah, you can see me, Rena?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, well, there you go, technology. You're not gonna defeat us today. So we're able to do the presentation, so that's awesome. Let us take some time now. Let's meet some of our classrooms because I'm sure they're gonna have a question or two. So we're gonna go to Courtney, British Columbia first. We've got Mr. Moore's class hanging out with us. Let me get their microphone turned on. All right, Mr. Moore, your microphone's not cooperating. If you don't mind just hitting the unmute for me. And then give us a big shout out so we know that you guys are ready.
Can you hear us? There you go.
There we go. How's it going, Courtney?
Uh-oh. Now we can hear you.
We can hear you. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, guys. This is Sadie.
Hi.
Why do you have a connection to the Salish Sea?
Why do I have a connection to
The Salish Sea.
Salish Sea.
Oh, okay. Well, so the Lummi Nation has been living and thriving on the shores of the Salish Sea for millennia. There are actually reef netting anchors. Reef net is a type of fishing that was developed by the Lummi tribe, my tribe, and it requires anchoring canoes, and there are reef net anchors that go back, I think, 15,000 years underwater there. And one of the ways that we won our right to fish again, because it was outlawed for a number of years, was that one of our tribal elders gave testimony, and the lawyer who was doing the cross-examination or asking the questions, he said, well, you know, how would it have been possible for your people to have put these giant anchors, these huge rocks under the water like that? How would you have moved them there? And the tribal elder, he said, well, it was simple. We tied logs around the base of these rocks and at low tide. And when the tide came in, it lifted the rocks and we towed them out to the location that we wanted our anchor. And then we let them go and we dropped them. And so that's how we got these anchors out to the desired locations. So the people, the Lummi people have a deep connection to the Salish Sea that goes back thousands of years. We've lived from the salmon and the other sea life in that region. And it's just it's a beautiful place that I'm happy to call home.
All right, very cool. Thanks for that first question to start us off. And I do want to give a shout out to some YouTube classrooms. Got Mrs. Johnson's group watching third graders in Chicago, Illinois. Got 6-7s hanging out in Surrey, British Columbia. We've got a group hanging out in Greece who's watching along with us. Very cool. And then another classroom, Monsieur Maloney's class is hanging out with us in Brantford. So shout out to the classrooms who stayed with us, even though we had a little bit of tech issues. So that's awesome. Yeah. Let's meet another live classroom. This time we're going to go to Mrs. Stan. All right. There we go. How are you doing, Alberta?
Hi.
Oh, no, they're waving like crazy, but I don't know if we can hear them. I know they were having mic issues a little bit earlier. Let's send someone nice and close and see if we can hear you guys. Okay, Miss Stan, whatever you did to fix the microphone isn't working anymore. So why don't you email me that question and I'll keep my eye out for it. So wave again, big wave from Calgary, Alberta. So we know you're there and we'll get you to email that question to us. All right. Let's see. This time we're going to grab a question from one of our YouTube classrooms. So this group on YouTube would like to know, do you have connections to other animals besides orcas? Does your tribe?
Oh, yes. The salmon really are the big, that's where my heart is. I love salmon. I think they're just the most amazing animals, the most amazing species. The way that they navigate, they leave the rivers that they're spawned in and they go out into the ocean and they travel around and, they stay gone for a number of years and then somehow they find their way back by sense of smell to the place that they were spawned after years. And then once they spawn, once they reproduce, they die, but they also are the source of what's called marine-derived nutrients. And all of the valleys upriver and the vegetation upriver, it's all benefiting from the nutrients brought back by the salmon. So when they die, all the other animals eat them, bears, birds, insects, and all of that nourishes the trees and the plants way upstream that otherwise have no access to those kinds of nutrients, those rich nutrients that come from the ocean. So they're just amazing animals. I love salmon. And they're delicious.
All right. All very good points. Absolutely. We are going to take a little trip now to Belleville, Ontario. We've got some grade 6-7s hanging out with us. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, Belleville?
Hey!
All right. Awesome. Who's got a question?
Hi, my name's Madison. I'm a grade 7 student, and I was just curious what exactly your occupation is. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm now a job skills instructor. I used to teach at the university, but I wanted to work in my own tribal community. And so I work for the Lummi Nation as a job skills instructor. And I see a lot of our fishermen. I'm from a fishing family, going back all those generations. And I work with a lot of fishermen who now have to find other work because it's not really as sustainable. It's not really a sustainable career anymore to be able to just be out on the water full time. So I work with a lot of fishermen and helping them, learn how to write resumes and cover letters, and we do practice interviews and retraining, and we try to find a good fit for them off the water, because for a lot of tribal members, this is a way of life, and it's something that we've done, for generations and generations. And so passed down from father to son, and sometimes father to daughter, within families. So it's kind of a new thing to have to learn how to do something else and think about leaving the water.
All right, and I've got a question emailed from Mrs. Stam's class. We'll give a big wave, Mrs. Stam's class in Alberta. There they are. All right. They're wondering about, do you or some of the researchers you work with follow a specific pod, and do the orcas have names?
Oh yeah, they have names. Some of them are pretty great. There's, let's see, well, there's Talequa, and there used to be an orca named Lummi, and she was the matriarch of her pod. I think that was J pod that she was the matriarch of. And the southern residents, they're J, K, and L pod. And so they convene sometimes during the season, during the summers. We'll see them all getting together to form a super pod. And it's during those times that they, it's kind of like coming together the way that tribes do to potlatch. They come together and they feast and they meet each other, and they have these different kinds of activities that they do that indicate that they're celebrating together. And, they'll just be in a particular region for a while, and then they'll move on. Yeah.
All right. Let's jump back to Mr. Moore's class. Do you guys have a second question for Rena?
We did the Molly. Molly, you want to introduce yourself? Go ahead, Molly.
I'm Molly, and why did you become a poet?
Oh, I'm a poet? What was the question?
Why did you become a poet?
Why did I become a poet? Oh, gosh. Well, I think maybe I always really loved the sounds of words as a child. Dr. Seuss and Shel Silverstein, the rhymes, the way that things sound. But I missed school one day on a sick day, and my homework got sent home, and the assignment was to write words about springtime. And I wrote a little poem, and my teacher liked it so much, she sent it into the local newspaper, and then they published it, and then she showed me, and I saw my name in the newspaper, and that was it. It was like, oh, okay, this is what I'm gonna be.
All right, very cool. Well, Alberta, give me another wave. I've got another one of your questions on deck. There we go. They're wondering what inspired you to become an explorer. Is there somebody who inspires you, or what inspired you?
Well, it was actually just that I'd never really, okay, so the story is that Lummi started getting involved with trying to bring Lolita home. And there was this opportunity to write about that. And I just thought it was a really great opportunity. And so to be able to follow that story was what really inspired me. And I still just hope and dream that she'll be able to come home and retire in the Salish Sea, because it's time. And I feel like that's a way to make things right. It can heal our relationship with the animals of the Salish Sea. It can move us towards repairing our relationship with nature, to just do this one simple act of being able to bring this orca whale home. Of course, it relies upon a lot of different factors, but I'm still hopeful that that will happen.
Okay, and one more question from YouTube. A classroom is wondering about the population numbers of orcas in the Salish Sea. Do you have a kind of a rough estimate of what that is?
Well, the southern resident killer whales, they're at 76 now. They lost 3 but gained 1 over the summer. And so that puts their population at 76, I believe. I'm pretty sure about that. Biggs killer whales, which are they're called transient killer whales or Biggs killer whales. Those ones are a different type of orca, and they eat marine mammals like seals and sea lions and things like that. So they don't eat the fish that the southern resident killer whales do, and they're doing very well right now. Those numbers are doing really well. And sometimes people will say, oh, but there's all these killer whales in the Salish Sea. And that's true, but the southern resident orcas, the ones that make their home between the southern tip of Vancouver Island and the Olympic Peninsula and the Salish Sea there, those ones are the ones that are not doing so well. So we're trying to really focus on their well-being.
All right. Well, Rena, thank you so much for persisting with us today. Sometimes technology doesn't always cooperate, but we were able to get the presentation going and talk to some of our great classrooms. We had a great group of classrooms from across North America, even a classroom in Greece tuning in today, so that was really cool. I want to thank all the classrooms who took part in Secret Path Week events. The last 4 days have been a blast. It's been a lot of fun talking to so many amazing Indigenous leaders and scientists and explorers from all over Canada, as well as the US. And Rena, thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for sharing with us today. And we're definitely going to host you again, maybe for a Nat Geo Explorer classroom, so you can share what you do in a little more detail with us.
Thank you.
All right, well, boys and girls, last thing I'll do is turn the microphones on. Let's get nice and loud. A big goodbye and thank you for Rena, and then we'll sign off for today. Here we go. All right, and I can imagine it's so loud in our Alberta classroom, Mrs. Stan's class. I can see yelling and waving, so I imagine it's super, super loud there. Once again, Rena, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun, and good luck with your trip in DC.
Thank you.